Hey guys, welcome to this week's videos, and I say videos because there are two. In the first, I'm going to walk you guys through what's called an essay writing rubric, and basically what this is a document which tells us how to mark your essays. So it's a document that contains information about what we're looking for when we're assessing your work, what makes good work, what makes less good work that needs a little bit of revision and a little bit of change, and how to give you guys marks. So basically, we're going to walk through a rubric, the rubric we use, and we're going to talk about how to make sure that your essays are as good as they can possibly be when you submit them so that you get those top marks and all the hard work you've been doing over the last 4 or 5 weeks is rewarded. Okay, so without further ado, the way this rubric works is you've got 20 marks allocated. So from 0 all the way through to 20. 0 marks, of course, means 0%, 20 is 100%, and you're going to score somewhere in between. So you will be given between 0 and 20 marks for your essay, and each of those marks corresponds to something in terms of what we need to see in order to give you that mark. Okay, so we're going to start with what makes really weak essays, things that just aren't going well for that student, and things that unfortunately we cannot give marks for, or that we have to take away marks for. So different things that you need to be aware of when you're writing to make sure to avoid. And to start off with, here we've got the range of 0 to 9, which are all fail marks, meaning that if you score between 0 and 9 out of 20, you have failed the essay. And at the very bottom, we've got this range here, so between 0 and 10%. Please avoid that. Please avoid putting yourself in a position to get that sort of mark, because it actually takes a lot to go wrong. Lots of problems. You might basically only have a few sentences in that essay. It might be that there are only a few relevant sentences, and you get a couple of marks just because you've gone to that effort. So usually between 0 and 6 marks, what tends to happen is that it's an incomplete essay. It's an essay that hasn't been finished. It's something where the student hasn't shown a lot of effort, and that means that we can't award any serious marks. So usually from 0 to 6 out of 20, you see very little useful information. It might just be a simple explanation of the Nile where the student basically tells us what the Nile is and was, but doesn't really go into the argument, doesn't talk about why it was important to the ancient Egyptians. And in terms of length, the essay might only be, say, 100 words or less. Okay, so something as simple as one short paragraph as opposed to an actual essay that is 2 to 3 paragraphs long, body paragraphs with an introduction and a conclusion, and about 600 words of arguing. So avoid that at any cost, and make sure that you're getting feedback from your teachers, because they will of course help you avoid that kind of mark. But also try to avoid the next sort of category here from 7 to 9. So what you've got here is basically from 8 to 9 is in the E's. So you've got A's, B's, C's, D's, E's, and ungraded below that. So an E is a fail mark. It's in the 40% range, 40 to 45% range, or rather 40 to 50% is E and E plus respectively. Both are fail grades. How do you get that? Well, you show very little knowledge. You might use only a single keyword or an idea or an individual or group connected to the Nile. You might not show much in the way of good selection of information. So you might only use a couple of pieces of information and there's no evidence, or you might even just use one single piece of evidence in the entire essay. And there might also be poor choice of evidence involved, where you don't use historical terms or concepts well, and you don't use them in an argumentative way. So from 7 to 9, those are fail grades. You want to avoid that. And the way to get those grades is to have very little knowledge shown in this essay. Then you move into basically what are pass marks all the way through to 15. So 10 to 15 is a passing grade. It goes from 10 and 11, D, D+, 12, 13, C, C+, 14, 15, B, B+. And as you go up, you're getting better and better. So there are particular weaknesses at the bottom, but you are getting stronger and stronger up till you get to 14, 15, which is a very solid piece of work. So most of you guys, where you'll end up is somewhere there, 14 or 15, kind of golden middle, where you show that you know how to write an essay, you show that you can use evidence, but you're not quite at the top yet, and there are weaknesses in your work that you need to address going forward. So how do you get something like a 10, 11, 12? Well, there you're talking about limited but satisfactory knowledge of the key factors. So we're talking about farming, we're talking about trade, we're talking about religion, and across those different areas of the Nile's importance to the ancient Egyptians, you show some knowledge, but not a lot. You might have brief analysis of the importance of the Nile, so where you talk about how the stuff you're using shows that the Nile was important, but you don't show a lot of understanding. And you might use evidence, but not a lot, maybe only a couple of pieces. And there might be lapses, there might be things that you don't cover really well. You might also focus only on one aspect, so maybe like you focus all of your attention on farming, and then your religion and trade paragraphs are really basic and don't do much for you. And definitely toward the bottom, you're talking about a simplistic argument. Something like, you know, the Nile was really important because they grew food there and that was it. So something that just doesn't show enough detailed knowledge, something that shows that you didn't do a lot of research, and as such, you don't get the marks. Toward the top of this category, you know, you've got competent, you've got a clear and logical and relevant argument. So you use the terms appropriately, you know, instead of saying something like they used devices to move water, you say they used shadoofs to move water from the rivers and streams to the fields. You show competent analysis. So you talk through the different factors in the importance of the Nile, and you show that your evidence makes for an argument, so that your evidence proves that you're right. Maybe you don't select it incredibly carefully, maybe you don't use the best possible evidence, but you use enough, and it's all organized and it's all relevant, even though it might be a basic argument. You've got a range of information in there. You know, you cover all the different things that we need covered, from farming to trade to religion, in good detail. And in the middle there, it's all about generalized knowledge. So where your knowledge is solid but unspectacular. Basic. So, you know, you use some evidence, but very, very generalized. And the selection of stuff shows weakness because you don't do a lot of selection. You just put in whatever you found first on the internet or in your readings or whatever. You might include irrelevant information, like how long the Nile is, for example, would be an irrelevant piece of information. And you might not focus on the question, rather you basically just provide knowledge of the topic. Or you might only address a part of the question. And then we move into the sort of top category up here. So from 16 through to 20 is in the A+ range. So 16 and 17 are A, and 18 through to 20 are A+. All right, so you go 80 to 85% and then 90 to 100. And in order to get those top marks, you really have to pull everything together. Your knowledge has to be incredibly detailed and sophisticated if you're looking for a 20 or 19. And you've got to be able to talk about how important not only the river was to the ancient Egyptians, but specific factors in the river. For example, its use for farming, its use for trade. Which ones are the most important to the ancient Egyptians? And you might rank them, or you might put more emphasis on one of them and say, this was the most important for these reasons. And then this was also important, but not as for these other reasons. So showing that you understand how these things relate to each other becomes super, super important in doing well. You're going to use a ton of different evidence, so not all from one source, not all one kind of evidence. You might even include a historian's quote. For example, I used one when I presented information to you guys earlier in the term. the so-called gift of the Nile, that's a quote from a historian from that time, from the time of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. You might use other historians in your work if you can. Original thinking is very, very much so something we look for in the best responses. So something that shows your point of view, not just your knowledge and understanding of the topic, but that you have something to say. And the more you have to say, the more is your own thought and your own work, the better. So a good essay will include lots of information from other people that you find. A great essay will use that information to make your argument, not theirs. And that's a really key difference. The more control you have over the evidence you use and the better you organize it and the more your point of view is at the heart of everything, the better you end up doing. So from 16 to 20 is the aim for everyone. That's your A+. If you can achieve it, great. If you can't, at the very least, you'll know where you didn't do the bit that was required. So if you look at this rubric, which is on the page for this week, you will find what we're looking for in each of these little categories. So for example, 1920, this is relevant. 1718, this is relevant. And then just go down the list and see what you're missing. And there will also be, of course, written feedback from your teachers, not only for the finished essay that's submitted, but also hopefully this week, as we go through the drafting process, your teachers will give you feedback. That might even extend into next week because the overall due date should be toward the end of next week, but it will be up to your individual teachers and they'll tell you guys more and give you more information on that going forward. Okay, thank you for listening, and hopefully now we can move on to the second part of the video, which you can also click on. Feel free to do that now or when you have an opportunity. All right, have a good night. See you soon.